So if any of you have any questions for Jeffrey Eisen, he works in psychonoetics. He's an enlightenment therapist, author, and educator. What we could do while we're getting this presentation over, if we could find him on Skype and relay a question to him. Is there anyone who knows the work of Jeffrey Eisen and has a question for him while we get the other presentation ready? I've had an update on the Eisen situation. His wife has said that she will present his presentation. And then we will have at the end, hopefully we'll have time to put questions to Dr. Eisen himself. So, as we bring up his wife, whose name I don't have as yet, on Skype or Adobe, just to set the context, there's a Chilean economist called Manfred Max Neef, who calculated recently that since 2008, the world has managed to mobilize about 17 trillion US dollars equivalent to bail out the banks. Now, he worked out that that was enough money to feed the starving people of our world for the next 500 years. So this gives us a bit of a sense of how the socio-economic system shapes what we feel we're able to afford. So maybe we'll get some thoughts on this and a reminder of the fundamental importance of what we're discussing here these days. So, hello, I don't know, I haven't had the pleasure. Jean DeRusso, is that your name? Okay, Jeff Eisen's wife, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic, and we can hear you. And your name is Jeannie, is that right?
It is.
Well, thank you for standing in. We're a bit behind schedule, so if it's possible to share the key ideas within 10 minutes time, that would be, within 10 minutes would be fantastic. If you need 15, that's also okay.
Oh my. Well, we have a presentation of about 25 minutes.
Okay, well, if possible, if you could sort of get through that in slightly quicker time, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I'll see what I can do. So you must already know that Jeff will be joining us for questions and answers after the presentation, and I hope there will be some time for that. Jeff wants me to let you know that he's not an economist, but rather a psychologist studying the role of socioeconomic systems and how they affect human consciousness and vice versa. As you see, the title of the presentation is Humanomic, and we're talking about moving from an energy-backed currency to a consciousness-backed culture through redefining profit. Excuse me. So Jeff's presentation today will focus on the key role of the concept of profit and the role that it plays in the current global economic crises. He is proposing a radical redefinition of profit, one that operates synergistically with a currency backed by renewable and sustainable energy, and one that will move business in a direction to reverse disastrous effects of the global crises today, as well as redirect human consciousness. We begin by introducing the concepts of scarcity consciousness and abundance consciousness. Since all fossil fuels are in diminishing supply, they encourage a consciousness of scarcity, whereas the development of alternative sources of energy enriches humanity, makes a positive contribution to the ecology of the whole earth, and leads us toward abundance consciousness. Secondly, we're noting that we're living through a time when every proposal, innovation, and initiative for reform is ultimately weakened, if not totally defeated, on the economic level. As we heard also from Hazel Henderson yesterday, the only way to get out of this bind is to move from a scarcity-based economy to an abundance-based economy. When we abandon the limitations of fiat currency and the gold standard, and even non-renewable fossil fuels, we move away from an economy founded on scarcity consciousness. When we back our currency with renewable energy, we move toward an abundance-based economy, from units of scarcity to units of abundance. With this sense of direction, let us now turn toward our focus of profit and examine how we currently define profit through a little invention called double-entry bookkeeping. How double-entry bookkeeping inevitably depletes both human and environmental resources, and how this deplorable situation could be easily reversed. How? By making it more profitable to contribute to humanity and the earth than it is to consume and pillage them. Capitalism and the corporate culture have become more and more destructive to both the quality of human consciousness and the quality of our ecosystem. Not intentionally, of course, for capitalism is just about making a profit, and the corporations which populate capitalism are profit-generating organisms. In this, corporations are not very different from biological organisms. All living systems have to operate at a profit, that is, increase their energy and substance as well in order to survive. Similarly, living systems survive, increase, and propagate by consuming the resources of their environment and successfully competing with other living systems for the same resources. And finally, like some corporations, living systems not only consume resources, but transform them, thus adding value. However, most living systems, from bacteria to rainforests, with the exception of those created by industrial man, ultimately create and put back more resources than they consume, with the ultimate return being the decomposition of their own bodies. For the most part, organisms are not only ecologically neutral, contributing as much as they consume, but ecologically positive, contributing more than they consume. Recently, however, industrial man has reversed this process, consuming far more than he contributes, creating mountains, rivers, and clouds of unusable and toxic waste, and threatening the very ecosystems that support him. So much so that in less than a century, a mere instant in the lifespan of the planet, the natural balance has begun to be destabilized. And we are teetering on the brink of unprecedented scarcity in such basics as uncontaminated water, food, fossil fuels, and clean air. All life is ecologically positive, but capitalism and industrialism tend to be ecologically negative. Returning to a consideration of consciousness here, there are many proposals on how to fix the consciousness of capitalism and the corporate system. But most are looking to either elevate the consciousness of management with the idea that an increase there would trickle down the ladder of corporate practices, or elevate the consciousness of consumers with the idea that informed buying would influence corporate practices from the bottom up. Despite the considerable merits of these initiatives, I fear they are doomed to only a moderate success, so long as the way that the corporations profit does not reflect their consumption of resources, both natural and human. My answer is to redefine profitability itself, and to thus encourage the move in consciousness from narrow self-interest to enlightened self-interest. Right now, the way in which corporations figure the ratio of profit to loss is basically double-entry bookkeeping. One column is for inflow, the income derived from selling goods, services, and the like. The other is for outflow, the cumulative cost of doing business. If the sum of column 1 exceeds the sum of column 2, the the corporation is profitable and viable. If not, it eventually goes bankrupt. No other considerations whatsoever really count. If the bottom line is negative, the corporation is not profitable. End of story. Every other consideration, consumption, pollution, fairness, social consequences, aesthetics, ecological devastation, etc., is reduced to profit or loss. This means that in the final analysis, every consideration has to favorably influence the bottom line. This, as far as it goes, is the way it has to be, even the way it should be. Corporations are subject to approximately the same energy economics as living systems. They have to make a profit, or at least not operate at a loss, in order to survive. The problem, though, is not that corporations operate for a profit. It's that the present economic system and not reality defines the profit. Another way of saying this is that only the corporation makes the profit, not humanity and the global ecology. That is, the human sphere. As a matter of fact, corporations regularly profit at the expense of the human sphere, consuming or destroying a large part of the global system in order to eke out a relatively minor profit for themselves. A corporation can destroy an ecosystem, pollute a river, and impoverish an indigenous culture, but if it makes a monetary profit, if it costs less to destroy part of the world than the income such destruction engenders, the corporation is deemed profitable, and the investors realize a comfortable return on their investment. This is not a real profit. That is not a profitable corporation, but a subsidized one that operates at a substantial loss. By who is it subsidized? By the countries that house it, by the ecosystems of the globe, by you and I, and by every person who walks or will walk the earth. It is clear that we have to build accountability and responsibility into corporate consciousness, but the question remains how to do that. I believe that the most useful way to do it is to redefine profitability. We have to hold corporations accountable for the real costs of their doing business, fully responsible for the consumption and the destruction they cause, and to require that they pay for the real costs of correcting it. In this context, a profitable bottom line would still be a surplus of income over expenditure, but the expenditure would include a monetization of the consumption and/or destruction of human and natural resources, and the income would be balanced by the need to pay compensation for the restoration of the human and natural resource pool. What I would propose would be changing from double entry to quadruple entry bookkeeping, adding a column on one side for system contribution and a column on the other side for system consumption or depletion. In this way, one could keep track of whether the corporation, viewed as a part of the total system of humanity and the earth which supports it, that is the human sphere, was really operating at a profit or a loss. And if not, one could calculate to what extent the corporation is withdrawing from the common property of all the sentient beings on earth. Corporations then would be taxed for the real costs of cleaning up the environment, replenishing resources, and as if this is possible, reversing human suffering and the degradation of everyday life. But also, they would be rewarded for any contributions to the Commonwealth. Overseeing this process would be a quasi-governmental function on a global level. I can imagine a sort of global IRS or ERS, External Revenue Service, which would further tax corporations which are system negative, reduce taxation and/or credit and reward corporations which are system positive, and neither tax nor reward corporations which are system neutral. Within this framework of two-way taxation, corporations would not be taxed solely on the basis of traditional profitability, but also on the net loss or gain to the social and ecological system. Profitability then would be redefined from a net monetary gain without regard to the whole system, to a net monetary gain balanced by its impact on the system. A system-positive corporation would be proportionally rewarded, and a system-negative corporation would be proportionally taxed. With this arrangement, it would even be possible for a corporation to turn a profit when it was running at a monetary loss, and conversely, for a corporation to operate at a loss, even though profitable in monetary terms. This alone, without necessitating any other changes whatsoever, would lead corporate energies in new and positive directions. Marxism failed by not taking into account two aspects of human nature: individual self-interest and the survival drive. Margaret Thatcher was of the opinion that due to the same considerations of human nature, there were no viable alternatives to capitalism. However, by redefining profitability, you neither have to change human nature nor abandon capitalism. Profitability can be redefined by extending its beneficiaries from the individual or corporate self, as well as other collective but separate selves like family, religion, nation, to the whole human sphere. This redefinition takes advantage of human nature and redirects it to benefit the world rather than plunder it. This is the concept of enlightened self-interest expressed on the corporate level. If we define what it is to be profitable, neither narrow self-interest, the survival drive, nor the drive to corporate profitability would have to be changed. Let's consider how such a redefinition might affect the whole system. As corporations find it more profitable to conserve and restore rather than to consume and destroy, we can expect an increase in corporate altruism and both ecological and humanitarian awareness. And this is why, because these qualities will have become economically advantageous.
I, for one, endorse that. Jeannie, thank you very much for presenting and stepping in this way. We only actually have an hour left in this session, and we've got two presentations which are actually over 35 minutes each. So I'm going to have to call it to a halt there. Would the organisers be able to confirm that we'll be able to see this presentation online, so we can see the rest of the slides? You'll be able to send it in, I think. Yeah, I'm getting some nods in the audience. Also, just to give you a sense of how people are responding in the audience, you've made the proposition that the profit motive of corporations as currently constituted is harming society and the environment. Who here agrees with that proposition in the audience today? We're with you, Jeannie, and we're with you, Jeffrey. So hopefully, Jeffrey, you'll be with us in probably 55 minutes' time when we can take some questions. So maybe rest up and we'll hear from you in 55 minutes. Thank you very much, Jeannie, and please also do stay with us. Our next presentation is from Professor Mark T. Brown. He's a professor in environmental engineering sciences and directs the programs in systems ecology and ecological engineering. And he's done research in ecological economics as well. And what I'm really interested to hear is also to get a sense of Mark's journey, because he's someone who has this great knowledge of environmental systems and has come to an awareness of the need to work on monetary reform and alternative money systems and so on. So I think that's a journey that many of us have been taking. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Mark.
Thank you very much. I would like to use the Mac because I have a couple of animations that I'm sure will not translate over to.
Okay, while we wait for this, could we have any questions for Jeannie or Jeffrey I think they're in Florida? Yes, so could someone be doing the question? Hello, ladies with microphones or guys with microphones? Yeah. Oh, wow, okay, well, one question. But you've turned her off.
Just a quick question. Just curious, how is this quadruple entry accounting any different from triple bottom line accounting?
Okay, well, we don't have her online anymore, is that what's happening? Well, with that, I don't want to do all that logging in stuff. Well, if we can't hear her, come
Hi, Jeff.
Ah, yeah, okay. So, Jeannie, did you hear that question? And Jeffrey, hello, good to see you.
The truth is I don't know. I'm not an economist and I don't really know.
Okay, well that's something maybe we could work on when we read your paper, and maybe our friends here in the audience will contact you with his ideas. And also we might chat about it afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, as that technological problem was not such a problem, how do we bring up your presentation? Mr. IT Man.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting us to arrive. I'd also like to acknowledge my co-author, Sergio Gianti, in the back of the room back there. It's a terrible thing, in many respects, to go as the last or second to last speaker, because I've changed this talk about 50 times since the beginning of this conference, but that's the way it goes. Okay, so I took the theme of this conference very seriously. We're going to talk about energy currency and energy as the fundamental measure of price, cost, and value. The organization, I'm going to talk a little bit about systems of value, and then a brief overview of Emergy accounting, that's spelled with an M, and then Emergy and GDP, national accounts, Emergy and trade, and Emergy and debt. And most of the data that I'll be showing you is for nations, but the concepts that I am going to explain here are equally applicable to regions, states, even cities, municipalities. So value is the worth of a good or service as determined by the market. In neoclassical economics, the value of an object or service is often seen as the price it would bring in an open and competitive market. There are two systems of value in reality. There is a donor value, that is, the more I put into something, the more valuable it is. And then there's the receiver system of value, utility. The more it's worth to me, the more valuable it is. And we carry both of those value systems around in our brains. We all know that the more you put into your child, the better off they're prepared for life. The more you put into that manuscript for writing, the better it'll be received and eventually published. We also, whenever we go to the store, to the grocery store, or to the market, we're interested in playing off one thing from the other and deciding which one is better for us, that receiver system. So we carry both of those. Emergy is a donor system of value. It says what it takes to make something determines its value. And that's not anything new. Of course, our good friend Adam Smith said that value of something is what goes into making it, the costs of the factors of production. And so there's a whole branch of economics that talks about and deals with determining value based on the factors of production. So I'm an ecologist and an ecosystem. The factors of production are sun and wind and rain and run-in and geologic processes and even organisms that move in and out. This is a system diagram of a very simple ecosystem with production here and then a chain of animals and consumption. So if I were to try to do the Emergy values, I would need to be able to turn these factors of production into some units that I could then add together in order to determine the total cost of producing that ecosystem. Well, the same is true for a human system and an economy. The factors of production are sun and wind, rain, CO2, and all of those things, as well as resources like fossil fuels and minerals, topsoil and groundwater, and goods and services. And the real trick here is to be able to put all of those factors of production into a common framework in order to be able to add them together. Well, economics sort of does that. The old utility theory of value says, well, there's prices for all that. I can put a price on topsoil, I can put a price on the groundwater, and I can put goods and services and so forth. But the trick here is that that's what it's worth to a human. That's not what it's worth to the biosphere or to the system as a whole. And so what we're going to try to do is to put some values on those factors of production. So, you've all had an economics course probably somewhere, and that's the first thing they show you in an economics class, that what an economy is production and consumption, and there goes the money round and round and round. But there's a real problem with that. They're lying. What is actually happening here, it's working, is that there is money going round and round, absolutely. But there's something else going round in countercurrent. There is labor, and there are goods and services. And almost every economics textbook that I've ever looked at leaves those two flows out. Sorry, I don't talk loud enough? Sorry. So they leave those two flows out and only talk about the flow of money. Now, a really interesting thing happened to me about 25 years ago when I first saw that diagram. I realized that money and resources go in opposite directions. I give you money, you give me food. I give you money, you give me fuel. I give you money, you give me labor. They go in opposite directions. And I started thinking about what's economics? It's looking at the money. There goes the resources. They're looking at the world backwards. Value is the resource. That's what drives the economy, not the money. The money is just what is being paid for the resource that drives the economy. All right, well, this isn't complete yet either. We need to have those factors of production. That's what's driving that circulation of stuff. We've got renewable resources here, and we've got a whole bunch of non-renewables. And that's driving production, and that makes goods available, and then those goods make labor available, and we've got a circulation of money. But we're still not quite done. In reality, there's a government out there, and it's another sector of the economy. And again, you have these closed loops of money in all of these cases. And if you look, every one of these is a closed loop. And so there's purchases by government, and then people pay taxes for the control that government provides, etc. But we're still not done. In reality, there's this new sector of the economy, the financial sector. And following on Schumacher's idea of a primary economy and a secondary economy, you all know that he said the primary economy was the environment, was the ecology. The secondary economy was industry and agriculture that was converting the primary economy into products for humans. Well, I suggest that there is a tertiary economy, and it's made up out here of the financial things that the bonds and derivatives and all of that. And I looked at the U.S. economy. And if you look at the primary economy and include forestry and fisheries and the like, this is just in terms of money now. The primary economy provides about 3% of the total GDP. The secondary economy provides about 32%. Government provides about 14%. And the tertiary economy provides about 53% right now. That's all paper that does not really have any resources associated. And so here we have what's happening to the U.S. economy. Here's the secondary economy declining. This is percent of the gross domestic product. And there's the tertiary economy taking off over the last 50, 60 years or so from 1947. It's a big problem. That's another talk, but I just want to point that out. Okay, so what is energy or emergy? We all know that energy is the ability to cause work. And we measure it in BTUs and joules and calories because we can convert all energy into heat. But it's really a misnomer and a real problem because energy comes in many forms: sunlight, wind, geopotential energy of elevated water, fuel the same stuff. Energy is not energy. Is not energy. Is not energy. In other words, a calorie is not a calorie. Is not a calorie. If it was, while we were in here eating lunch downstairs, you all, instead of eating that lunch, could have gone out on the lawn out there and laid there and opened your mouth and swallowed some sunlight, and you would have swallowed in that short period of time as many calories as you consumed downstairs. It won't work. By the same token, you can't run your car on solar energy unless you have a major converter. Several hectares of land convert that sunlight into ethanol. So 1 calorie of sunlight is not equivalent to 1 calorie of ethanol or of human work. In fact, so I'll get there in a moment. So we have this concept then that evolves from this realization that energy has a quality to it, and it has to do with its concentration and its convertibility, flexibility, and so forth. And thus is born the term energy. Now we called it a long time energy quality, and over the years we realized we needed a term, and energy is the one that evolved. And it is the available energy of one type required directly and indirectly to make something. So again, remember, it's a donor system of value, so it's what goes into making something. That's the number one thing. And the second thing is that we express it in the same form of energy. We usually use solar, which you can use you can use coal energy if you wanted, or even oil energy. But we use solar to get back to the basics. So it's sometimes thought of as the memory of energy that is used in the past, similar to embodied energy. The units that we use are solar energy joules, and we often abbreviate those as SEJs. So the units of energy, as I said, are solar M-joules. So here's an ecological food web. It actually happens to be an estuary. You see all those organisms, and there's energy flow that moves through that. Now the interesting thing about food webs is that as the energy is passed from one component to the next, there's less and less energy along the way because of the second law. All bunch of it just goes down the heat sink and is not available to the system. So you can take a food web like that and convert it into an energy chain. The producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, and the tertiary consumers. And you can say, okay, what's the total energy driving this system in equivalents of sunlight? And it's 1 million joules per day. And of that 1 million, only 1,000 joules get passed to the primary consumers. The rest, whoops, you hit the wrong button, sorry. The rest is lost in heat. And of that 1,000, only 100 get passed to secondary consumers. This is a 10% efficiency, and on down until you wind up with only 1. And that's the basis of energy. It says it takes 1 million solar M-joules to produce 1 joule of this, the tertiary consumer. And it takes 1 million to produce 10 of the secondary consumer. All well and good. Here's the human industrial society, techno-society, a food web of sorts, all of the energy that's required. And here it is as a chain. So it takes 20 million direct and indirect solar energy to produce 1 unit of human labor. So 1 unit of human labor is worth 20 million solar M-joules. And that's the way you can now compare across. So it takes 20 million to produce 500 of coal, and 20 million to produce 100 of electricity. So here are some solar transformities. These are the relationships between sunlight, which we take as 1, and the other energy. So electricity is equivalent to 550,000 joules of sunlight. Or to put it the other way, in order to have an equivalence, you have to have 550,000 joules of sunlight to equal 1 joule of work, of the work potential of electricity. Now that varies. It depends on the plant that you're using the power plant that you're using. And so the others here, about 150,000 joules of sunlight of oil. 150,000 joules of sunlight to make 1 joule of oil. So when somebody says there is enough sunlight falling on 1 square kilometer of the Earth's surface to supply the energy needs of Croatia for the next 10 years, they have forgotten about quality. There is not enough energy on 1 square kilometer of the Earth's surface. In fact, if you take all of the sunlight falling on the entire planet Earth, it will supply 6% of the total energy demand of humanity on a time basis. Only 6%. So there's no way we're going to supply enough energy from sunlight to support this system that we have with these wonderful lights and projectors and on and on and on. Okay, so a resource-based currency must account for all resource inputs, not just electricity or one form of energy. Here's an example. Here's Croatia. This is what I call an energy signature, or an energy signature. And it shows the renewable... I keep hitting that wrong button. It shows the renewable portion. These are in giga solar M-joules per meter square per year, just to put it on a basis. The renewable portion, the forestry and fisheries that are consumed, fossil fuels that are used that are indigenous, and minerals and metals, and then these are the imports. Okay, so that's Croatia. This is the United States. Notice the difference just in the magnitude here. There's an order of magnitude difference in the scale, but that's not important in bars. We don't have nearly as much renewable as compared to fossil fuels, and we don't import very much. And I just came back from Costa Rica. Well, there's the two sort of compare them and see. And so if we're going to have an energy basis for a currency, we need to include all of the factors of production, not just electricity or fossil fuels or whatever. And here's Costa Rica. Costa Rica is running on the majority of their energy is renewable. They've got wonderful rivers and dams and so forth. And so if you only look at electricity, for instance, what happens is you shortchange the developing and undeveloped countries. This is a graph of normalized fuel use. I used fuel. I could have used electricity. It would even be worse if we used electricity. So if fuel predicted total energy use, they would all line up right along that line. Every one of them would. These are the developing and undeveloped economies of the world. These are the developed ones. They all line up. So once you become overly developed, fuel use and total energy use begin to be very similar. Okay, so an economy. How much time have I got? What are we doing?
Maximum 15.
15 more?
Maximum.
That's great. Okay, here's our economy again. Money going round and round on the inside, being driven by energy inputs from the outside. This happens to be the U.S. economy, and we have about 23 times 10 to the 20, 2.3 times 10 to the 25th solar M-joules per year driving the economy. And the GDP is about 9.8 times 10 to the 12th dollars. And so we can do a relationship between energy and dollars, and we can express that as the what I call the M dollar value, 2.3 times 10 to the 12th solar M-joules per dollar. So for every dollar in the economy that is circulating, it takes 2.3 times 10 to the 12th solar M-joules of energy. Now we've got a wonderful way then of comparing dollars and going back and forth between dollars and energy. So that's what I just said. It is not constant, it changes. We look here, in the year 2000, that value was 3 times 10 to the 12th. In 2004, it was 2.4 times 10 to the 12th. And now, today, in 2008, which is the last year for which we have data, it's about 2.3. And in fact, it's been going downhill ever since. That's inflation. is all it is. If the amount of money that is chasing the energy rises faster than the energy does, that's inflation. And so what you're looking at is an inflation graph for the U.S. economy. All right, so here's a bunch of countries, and we have a data set for all of the countries of the world in the Center for Environmental Policy. And I'd be happy to give you the URL for that. Anybody can download that data and have a look at the energy that is driving every economy of the world. And here, over here at the very end, this is the renewable inputs to each economy. I don't have all of them here, I've only grabbed a bunch. And then the non-renewable inputs and their gross domestic product. And so here's that energy to money ratio for each one. Here sits the United States, that 2.3. Notice that the only country in the world that has a lower one is Japan. But also notice that as we go down, these numbers get big. Now, the first time I did this, I thought, wait a minute, this is crazy. I must have done something wrong. Because it says that the U.S. has the lowest energy per dollar. And we're always the best, right? We're always the biggest, but we're the lowest. And then I started thinking, but what does that mean? That means if I take my dollar, 2.3 times 10 to the 12th, and I go to Mali, divide 38 by 2.3, what do you get? 16? I have an advantage of 16 to 1. At home, my dollar only buys 2.3 times 10 to the 12th. But if I take that dollar to Mali, it buys 38 times 10 to the 12th, about 16 times as much. That's why we love to go to undeveloped countries and take our money there and vacate, right? You get a lot more for your money because there's more energy in their economy per dollar that is circulating per currency. Well, that's all well and good. That then will bear in just a moment on tourism as well as trade. The other thing, here's all of the countries of the world aligned. Here's the developed economies. Down here, the US and Italy and Europe. Here are the developing. And then here are, I call them the underdeveloped, and I understand that that's not PC, but here's all of the underdeveloped. And notice, so when I take my buck and I go, my dollar, and I go to those countries, I bring back a lot for my money. Okay, here's trade. This happens to be between the US and my colleague's country, Italy. And if we just trade dollar for dollar, and I'm assuming that we're both getting an average basket of goods, that means that my dollar can be expressed by the 2.3 times 10 to the 12th. It turns out that because Italy's is higher, Italy loses on every trade, dollar for dollar, everything being equal, by about 2 to 1. So I have a trade advantage with Italy of about 2 to 1. Well, my students, they saw through that right away. And the first thing they said to me was, well, we don't have a normal basket of goods. No, we trade actual goods. So here's trading phosphate from country A for corn from country B. And there's $10 circulating. And I just did that because a bushel of corn is actually about $7 on the market, but 10 is easier to divide by, so I just made it $10. It could have been $1. And the interesting thing is that phosphate has huge energy per dollar. And that's a very important thing to remember, is that raw resources have very large energy per dollar, and finished products have very small energy per dollar. So if I trade raw resources for finished products, I lose every time, and I lose big time. So what are we doing? The developed countries of the world are sucking raw resources out of the developing world and sending back finished products. And so we have the trade advantage every time that we do that. So here, the trade advantage turns out to be almost 340 to 1 in terms of the energy value of the two things that are traded. Now, some people say, well, what does that got to do with anything? Think about what energy is. It drives a process. And so if I get something that's a raw resource, and I put it into my industrial system, and I start upgrading or value adding to that raw resource, I am employing a huge number of people, my economy is bustling, and everything else. Then I import a Walkman. What does it employ? It employs maybe the person that sold me the Walkman. All of the employment happened over in the US that built the Walkman. And I use that example because I was in Papua New Guinea about 20 years ago, and we're cruising down the street, and here's this guy, he's bobbing along, and he's got a Walkman on his head. And I just had to stop and ask what he was listening to. So I pulled up and I asked him in Pidgin English, which is a very interesting language. What are you listening to? And he hands it to me. And I put it on, the Walkman's old, it's broken, only one thing is working. And he was listening to the Mamas and the Papas sing California Dreaming. Now, what they had exported from Papua New Guinea to get that was an incredible amount of raw resource. Copper, tuna, you name it. Forests, and he had this thing, and it was playing the Mamas and the Papas.
5 minutes.
I said time out. 5. I think I may make it. Okay, now the other thing that's really important here is this official exchange rate. Anybody know how that's developed? So here's all the bunch of countries, here's their currencies, here's the official exchange rate. Somebody decides whether or not they have any confidence in the yuan, and so they're buying and selling, and you wind up with some kind of an official exchange rate. We calculate the energy-based exchange rate, which is the exchange rate of energy per dollar based on this GDP, SEJ per GDP. And then we say, so what's the difference? And what we find again is, of course, the US is one, because it's our dollar that's doing it. And every developing country in the world is really being, they're being taken advantage of. Put it that way. 20 to 1, just in terms of the exchange rates of their two, this has nothing to do with trade now, this is just exchange rates. So every time they trade, they're getting not only taken advantage of because they're usually selling raw resources, but then they're also being taken advantage of because the exchange rate is so phenomenally bad. All right, debt and debt relief. We had a project funded by the United Nations Environmental Program a couple of years ago, and we were looking at this whole region of Africa. And the question, one of the questions we asked is, if we look at debt repayment based on the energy that's inherent in the dollars that they export versus the dollars that they're paying, how does that stand up? What does that look like? And so here's a little graphic, maybe it'll work. There's Niger and its economy over there, here, and here's the IMF and the global economy. And so they borrow some money, well, first their economy, and then they borrow some money, and it has a certain energy per dollar ratio. Then they repay with their dollars. And notice the big difference. There's an order of magnitude difference between the energy that's inherent in their currency and the energy that's inherent in the world currency. And so there goes then the demand that they buy, those Walkmans that I was just talking about from the developed world. And here is the world, where did it go? Oh yeah, the world now taking resources from Mali. And when you look at that, there's a huge problem with all of that. And I'll skip that and we'll go right into, so here we have time, debt up, credit down. And so you start out with some debt to the rest of the world, and you repay theoretically. And at some point in the time, you are now have paid it off. And that's money and energy, because my currency is worth so much more. In theory, I would pay it off a little early. And in fact, if I keep paying until my dollar eventually becomes zero, I'm now down here where the world owes me. I've paid my debt, and now it's the other way around. And so that's the payoff time difference. And so here, so the payoff time and the overpayment amount. And here is Niger. They paid off their debt, according to Emergy, in 1974, which is right there. And it has been negative ever since. And the world, according to Emergy, owes Niger $1.5 billion because they've overpaid their debt. And here are all of the Africa's overpayment. And if you look, you'll see that every one, with the exception of Rwanda, has overpaid their debt. And it's anywhere from 2 billion to 200 billion overpayment based on the Emergy value of their currency. Debt relief should happen now, and it should happen 100%, rather than we ought to pay them all of the money, but at least erase the debts. That's the study. You can download it now, I think, from the UNEP site. So there were 2 books that were produced there. And
fantastic. Thank you very much. Particularly with those last slides. Who here seconds the idea that Professor Brown should be the next head of the World Bank? Well, what I love about your presentation, it reminds us that economics, if it wants to be a science rather than a nonsense, needs to remember the real world and start with the real world in mind. We can't take questions now. Please, if you have a question for Professor Brown, write it down so you don't forget it. We'll try and squeeze in some questions in the end if the organisers allow us to overrun slightly. So thank you very much for that presentation. Now, congratulate yourselves. You have arrived at the last substantive paper presentation of the whole conference. And like in any good event, like a rock concert, you say the best to last, the headliners. So we now have the authors of the seminal report, Energizing Money. We have Ludwig Schuster, who's a freelance project manager and consultant for social entrepreneurs with long-term experience in the field of complementary currencies and alternative finance. And he's a member of the scientific committee of the German Regio Geld Association. So he's, like his co-presenter, doing both a lot of thinking and also very connected to on-the-ground innovation. Josh Ryan Collins is the co-founder of the Brixton Pound, which you just saw a video about. But he also works with the New Economics Foundation's finance and business team. And he's the lead author of your required reading for the rest of your lives. So it's called Where Does Money Come From? It's essential reading. It really does help lay to rest any doubts around the nature of credit creation. And of course, once that's clear, you then have to start looking, as he's doing, at looking at more democratic alternatives, including strategic credit creation by governments, central banks, full reserve banking, and complementary currency systems. So, over to you, the Lennon and McCartney of the currency world.
Thanks very much, Jeb, and thanks to all of you for your patience still being here at this time when the beach is obviously cooling. We're going to go through the report quickly. It's a 70-page report. Hopefully, some of you have had a chance to take a look at some of it over the past couple of days. In some ways, it might have been better to have done this at the beginning of the session, but I still think it will be helpful for us to go through the basic findings that came out of the research. Big thanks to the Forty Foundation for supporting a piece of research that NEF has been wanting to do for a very long time, into this vitally important relationship between money, energy, and the wider economy. The objective of the report really was to look at a very, the full swathe of proposals, actual projects, ideas in this field, where you can include different kinds of models that are directly about linking money to a commodity like energy, currencies, and accounting systems such as the one we've just heard about from Mark. What we noticed straight away was that there's multiple objectives here. People are employed in different projects, they have different ideas of where they want to get to. And we should be thinking very much about taking out the best from all of these different proposals, rather than trying to search for a sort of a win, you know, the best world that sorts out all the world's problems. And I think we've seen in the last few days the variety and the diversity, and we need to hold on to that. But we did want to use this report to try and cut through some of the complexity and to ensure that the idea of linking money to energy is taken out of the niche, perhaps, that it's currently caught in, and taken out to a wider audience so we can engage with a wider audience. Just to summarise the report quickly, we focused the first chapter really on the relationship between nature and the modern way of thinking about the economy, neoclassical economics. I'm just going to talk very briefly about that in the next slide. Then we look at the relationship between nature and money, of which I think we've heard a lot already today, so I'm not going to repeat that. And then we develop a taxonomy as a way of kind of guiding our thinking through the different models that we've heard about, and Ludwig is going to talk us through that. And we also looked at a very wide range of case studies, and Ludwig's going to talk about some of those. And the diversity, as I said, is extremely interesting. And then we have conclusions, and Leander Bindemark is in the audience here, very kindly helped us put together an appendix of 36 other examples that we thought were very interesting for further exploration. So that's in the back of the report. Just to say, the report will be, it's in your folders, but it will be on the NEF website in a couple of weeks for free downloading. There are some areas which we will be correcting, so just to let you know about that. Just on this first point about economics, modern day economics, sort of reiterating what Mark's just said, the key point for me that perhaps hasn't come out today is that this model, where essentially you have these factors of production, the key point about it is that these factors of production that enable the economy to go round, in neoclassical economics, there's an assumption that they all come somehow from households, that we as property owners, we own the land beneath us, that we own the soil, and thus in the production process we give it to firms who turn it into goods and services and return money to us. And the idea really is that those natural resources essentially are substitutable for capital or for labour, that they have sort of infinite substitutability. The reality is, you've been hearing over the last few days, is the real economy looks like this. And those natural resources, those flows, and this is again the difference between stocks and flows, those natural resources that we need to do everything else in the economy are not substitutable. They're outside the capital and labour. You can substitute capital for labour, you can make technological efficiencies, you need less labour, or vice versa, which is actually what we need to turn ourselves into a more sustainable economy. But you can't substitute energy, sunlight, and solar power, and all the other kinds for capital and labour. This is a huge misunderstanding in neoclassical economics that we need to move beyond, and a really good way of doing that is to account for energy properly in our economic system in the way that we just had Mark and others describe. And the flaws in the monetary system, I'm not going to spend any time on at all, because I think we have absolutely covered that over the last 3 days. So over to Ludwig for the taxonomy.
Thank you. Is the mic working? I don't know. Is the microphone? Yeah, it's on. Okay, great. So I just, instead of starting with the taxonomy, I just wanted to ask a question to everybody in the room. I won't ask the question if money should be linked to energy, and I wouldn't dare answering it today. But maybe a more simple question: should everybody have access to water? What do you think? Just raise your hand if you think everybody should have access to water.
Yes.
Wow, that's quite a lot. How do you know what I really meant? Maybe I didn't mean tap water or drinking water. Maybe I didn't even mean water that you could consume but seawater. Maybe I meant the access to water. Maybe I meant something completely different. And would you still agree that everybody should have access to water, even if it's quite expensive at any price? I don't know. I don't really know. And this also implies the question of who really is asking that question. Is it the Human Rights Watch or is it Nestlé? So it would make a difference. And then in that very same sense, the question if money should be linked to energy cannot be answered without being more precise what the question really means and who is asking the question with what objectives. So the objective thing is one key issue. The basic question we posed in the beginning was if money should be linked to energy, or in effect it was meant the other way around, if energy should be linked to money. Money should be energized, or in contrast to that, if energy should be monetized to achieve very different goals. One goal would be to cure the monetary functions, to cure the monetary system. And the other objective would be maybe to cure our energy system and to guide the way to a transition to a more sustainable energy supply system. So what we basically did then was to examine the two domains in which we are working. This is the money domain and the energy domain. And we saw that in the money domain, we could distinguish the three basic functions. I'm not questioning if that's the right thing to do, to stick to these three functions. But anyway, we have the unit of account function, we have the means of exchange function, and we have the store of value function. In the energy domain, we can distinguish basically between energy as an accounting value and energy as a commodity. So we see that Mark Brown talked about energy or energy as an accounting value. There may be also different other accounting values which are similar to that, like net energy return, energy return on energy invested, and so on, embodied energy. There's lots of types of accounting energy flows, energy inputs, and so on. What's the difference? The big difference is that energy is only a commodity if it's traded, if it's available for one but not for the other, if it can have a price, if you can access it and unitize it and consume it and transfer it and so on. You can't do all that with energy as a pure accounting value. So when we are in the domain of energy as a commodity, then there's further questions to be taken into account. That's, for example, we do need to distinguish what we mean, what kind of energy we mean. That could be energy that we consume or energy which is saved. What is relevant is the quality of energy, like Mark Brown already pointed out. If it is renewable and or non-renewable, and if yes, in what form? Is it wind energy, solar energy, and so on? So this will make a difference. And certainly any kind of these commodities can also be put into a basket of commodities, and this would also make a difference for the currency design. Then we looked at the links between those two domains. An energy currency could be a currency that has only a reference to one of the two, to the accounting value or to a commodity, or even only to its price. But it could also be physically backed by the energy, which means the one who is issuing the currency really holds the currency, or is expected to hold the currency, commodity, sorry. And in that case, it also makes a difference if the holder of the currency can redeem it for the commodity of the issuer or not. Then this will lead to another basic distinction that we found was related to those currency functions and energy types. The basic distinction between a non-redeemable unit and a redeemable unit. So you can distinguish all the energy concepts, just energy money concepts, just by asking that question already. For the non-redeemable units, and also for the others, you can ask the question if that you can also ask if that the money you're talking about will only measure the value, which is the accounting function, or if it is transferring value actually. So you're transferring, on the one hand side, you're transferring the monetary union, but on the other hand side, you will also trade the commodity which is involved. So the three basic functions of money, I've put it into three columns, just because the three functions are closely related to the energy characteristics. So the difference is concerning the functions, if the currency does only the accounting function, or it provides also a transfer of value, which, by the way, the energy proposal did not. So the energy proposal, as far as we have heard today, would be in the accounting column. And then a currency could also be redeemed or not, so we have the redemption principle, which is very closely related to the store of value function. So a currency unit which is redeemable will provide very good for the store of value function, whereas a means of exchange, the means of exchange function may not be dependent on the store of value function. But if we take a closer look at the redemption, then we will see that it will make a difference in currency design. If you can redeem your currency for energy, we're still talking about energy as a commodity, you can't redeem it for the accounting unit. If it's redeemed for energy which is readily available today, which is produced on demand, or which is available already when the currency is issued, or if it is redeemable for future production, that means that you may have invested in the future production, then you get a promissory note for the production of energy in the future, but the currency will have its value today. So, on the one hand side, so those are two aspects of the store of value function, which in classical economics correspond to the two terms hoarding and investment. So you can save value from today for the future by hoarding your currency, or hoarding your assets, or hoarding your claims for a product. Or you can put your money into a bank account, the bank is investing it in future production, and then you will be available to buy the commodity later on. So these are the two distinctions of saving, hoarding, or investment. And then there's another distinction, which these three basic functions of money don't reflect what we heard is really essential for money. That is the fiat credit principle, namely to issue currency in advance without somebody somebody needs to save. So if you issue a investment currency in advance, you could, through spending into circulation, a promissory note for future production, you could finance whatever you like, as long as people believe that the expected projected production will really be provided. So this is the basic taxonomy we have sort of made up during our analysis, and in a way this should help you to assess and to compare the different energy money types which have arisen so far, and it could also be designed as a guideline for designing new currency types in this field of energy money. Now the basic distinctions, if we get back to those to these basic distinctions which underlie the whole taxonomy, is if the units are used for only comparing things, which was the case in the energy proposal, or allocating commodities, allocating energy. If it's a unit which leads to allocation, then it can be distinguished if it is only reference to the energy commodity, or if it's really backed by the energy commodity. And if it's backed, the basic distinction that can be made is if it's irredeemable or redeemable for the energy which relates to it. And then if it's redeemable, it can be further distinguished in an energy debit, which would be the hoarding principle, or an energy credit currency, which would more correspond to the investment type. And in the energy credit realm, we could see that there would also be the possibility to issue the currency in advance, and that way create a fiat credit energy currency. Just to illustrate all these distinctions, I have chosen through three different examples, which is left in the left upper corner is the kilowatt cards. Somebody here in the room may know it already. Then the Sonnenschein note in Steierberg, where Margaret Kennedy lives, which has never been implemented, unfortunately, and the kilowatt dollars note, which also is on the cover of our report. So if we look at the kilowatt cards note, we have a redeemable currency, which is redeemable for energy available today. So it's a commodity that is traded, and that is energy which is produced today. So we have a stored value. It's physically backed by the energy, and it's redeemable for the energy at the energy supply company. Interestingly, any energy supply company in the world which is connected to that system, which are quite a lot. And it is related to final energy, that is used energy, renewable energy, which is consumed. Or not even only renewable energy, I don't know about that. But what we see here is that this currency clearly fulfills the store of value function. This is its core function. So you can save in these units and avoid inflationary effects in energy. You can pay with that currency in 10 years and still will receive 10 watts or 10 kilowatt hours. It also fulfills the unit of account function and the unit of exchange function. So it's a true currency. Then the Sonnenschein notes are not much different from that, but the basic difference is that they are issued for future production. So you can invest in the setting up of a solar power plant, and then these and you will get in return these Sonnenschein notes, and use them to pay in shops that are, are in the place and, sorry?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. You can use it for any shops that are at the place which are connected to the system. So this is a currency which fulfills the investment principle. Now the last example in this regard is the renewable energy dollar, Baishan Turnbull. Baishan. I hope I don't get things wrong, so you correct me if I'm wrong. In that example, what we found out basically is that the Renewable Energy Bank Turnbull proposes does nothing else than a bank does today. It takes into its accounts securities, which is collateral usually. In this case, the Sonnenschein notes would be taken into the bank as a reserve, and the bank would issue another currency on that basis, which would be the means of exchange. So, while the Sonnenschein notes fulfill the store of value function, the kilowatt dollar notes would fulfill all the other functions. So what we see here is that basically a currency does not need to fulfill all functions in one, but the whole currency architecture may do so.
You got it right, but it's not what I present today.
I know you didn't present it today.
Change the mind.
So, anyway, not all of the examples fit into that scheme. We saw, for example, the Sonnenschein notes in Burgle. They are denominated in 900 kilowatt hours, which is quite much. So, and they are not meant to be transferred to anybody else. They are accounted directly on your energy consumer account. While they fulfill the unit of account function and the store of value function, they do not fulfill the means of exchange function. So maybe they cannot be called an energy currency. That's a matter of definition. The same is true for the energy proposal, which is completely clearly at the left hand, as I said. So what works and what not? I would give to Josh at that point, and yeah, we have only 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I will finish off very quickly, so I know Yuri wants to move on to the next session. Key findings, as I said, different objectives will require different models. I think we felt, as I think come out from this conference, that we do need a new reference, a unit of account that links our accounting system to the natural world. I think we can agree with that. Pricing nature and this non-substitutability issue. This is obviously a really challenging top-down reform. It requires states to act together collectively. We've seen the failure of Rio just recently, so not huge optimism there, unfortunately. In a way, I think we should concentrate our efforts, perhaps, on stimulating local and regional energy transition. And as Ludwig mentioned, the debit energy currencies can both play a role as a more stable store of value and encourage more sustainable consumption, particularly if they're linked specifically to future renewable energy production. But I particularly think there's real possibilities with this idea of credit creation, which we've heard about. We've heard Richard talking about it and others talking about it, and public credit creation being linked to the future productive capacity of renewable energy sources, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's hydro, because this is a way of giving us that power of credit creation that's so important if we're going to make this great transition to a low carbon, sustainable future. We hold on to that credit creating power that linking directly to a commodity like gold, as we see, won't enable us to do, but yet we maintain some control over it. And for me, that's the most important thing that's come out of this conference, is how do we link our monetary system to the real, sustainable, future productive capacity of our world. We can develop that idea that Ludwig's talked about to do that. Going forward, what's the future research agenda? We need to encourage more innovation, more experiments. we need to learn from the past. Some of these models, you can see here, the Delhi dollars and Sham model, 30, 40 years old. Let's make sure we learn the lessons from these models as we go forward. Let's scale them up. Let's pick out the best, let's scale them up. I think we need more research on the legal and regulatory constraints facing these projects. I think the talk from Marisa was a fascinating insight into how you can get a central bank to engage with this agenda. Perhaps something that many of us just write them off, but it's possible, and there's very interesting things happening in Latin America there, particularly. And finally, I think we need to engage with a much wider range of stakeholders. And we talked about some of those energy companies, credit unions, local finance initiatives that are basically on our side, ethical finance, building societies, we heard from Pat today, local government, really important, small businesses desperately need support, they need working capital. How can we support their agenda? How can we listen to their needs? And also I think the big NGOs, the environmental NGOs, the development NGOs, I'm sorry to say that there's a very poor level of understanding amongst these big organisations with large sums of money. A lot of them are addressing the sticking plaster issues rather than the fundamental systemic issues that we've been talking about at this conference. So how can we engage with them?
I think that's
move the agenda
a great point to end on. Thank you, Josh. Quite important to remind us of how we may share this critique, but the wide world doesn't. Rio+20, there were 3 big declarations, the government declaration, the declaration from business, and also from the People's Summit. None of them mentioned the word monetary, none of them mentioned the monetary cause of our current crises. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the way that you've shown how to approach this in a very systematic way and think about how can we design currencies that will reconnect us to the natural world rather than sort of separate us, I think is really important. So thank you for that. Thank you to our other speakers. I'm told that all our speakers for this session will be able to now stay with us on the panel and take questions as part of the final panel. I think it's a good idea. So thank you once again. Give everybody a round of applause. I thought it was a good session. And we're going to come back to the next session.